Good Yontif. Maybe it was because she grew up in a very small Jewish community. El Dorado, Kansas was home to about 10 Jewish families. Maybe it was because of her deep love for Jewish values, traditions, and teachings. Whatever inspired it, my mother absolutely delighted in discovering that the perfect stranger with whom she was sitting on the airplane or whom she happened to begin speaking with in the museum or concert hall at intermission was, like her, a Jew. If one of her kids was nearby, she'd shoot us a knowing look, and in a stage whisper, she'd say, "He's Jewish." Sometimes it was obvious, a giant Star of David around his neck, a chamsa. Maybe it was the name. David Shapiro was an easy one. Racholea Rabinovitz, a gimme. But Mom could find the Jewish Maureen O'Malley, too, somehow. And then it was time for some Jewish geography. Before you knew it, Mom had found a connection, maybe through an acquaintance, a distant cousin, some rabbi we knew in common. When I decided to go to rabbinical school, it got really bad. Step 1, my mom would identify the Jew. Step 2, she'd find a way to chat up the Jew. Step 3, make the connection. Step 4, seize the opportunity to announce proudly to her new best friend that her son was studying to be a rabbi. Once on a family vacation, we sat down for dinner, and a member of the staff approached our table, came right up to me, and he said, "I hear you're a rabbi. We're going to be doing a Hanukkah lighting in the lobby of the hotel tomorrow. Would you care to help us? Your mom said you'd love to." Thanks, Mom. Now, I don't want you to think that my mom's ability to identify and connect with Jews was flawless. Sometimes, what my brother and I called her Judar, sometimes her Judar was off. Once on a phone call with Mom, I was in college, I mentioned to her that I was going to see a Bruce Springsteen concert the next evening with some friends, and she said, "You know, he's a self-hating Jew, don't you?" I mean, he never talks about his Jewish identity, she continued. He's not raising his kids as Jews. He hasn't ever performed in Israel. "Mom," I noted, "we've talked about this before. Bruce Springsteen is not a self-hating Jew, Mom. Do you know why that is? Because he's not a Jew at all. Yes, his name ends in Steen, and he is from Jersey, but he's still not Jewish." There was a pause. "Still," she said, "he could be more supportive." My parents taught us that we were part of a community, a people, members of a tribe. They were devoted to our synagogue. Mom was president of the Temple Sisterhood. She was an active, lifelong learner, forever volunteering for things like the outreach committee, the book drive, and task forces of every kind. She was a sucker for a good task force at the Temple. And my dad was active too. He was honored to be named the Volunteer of the Decade at our local JCC. For us kids, attending religious school all the way through confirmation was an absolute requirement. Mom insisted that we all try Jewish summer camp and youth group, and we liked it so much that we went back year after year. And my parents walked the walk with their tzedakah dollars as well, supporting the temple, our local federation, and a host of Israel-related activities. And their example, the way they modeled the importance of being part of Jewish community, shaped me in the most profound ways, leading me ultimately to the rabbinate, to devoting my professional life to Jewish community, education, and values. It's what inspired me to move to Israel to study, and that's where I met my wife, the mother of our 3 daughters, by far the best outcome of all. My life has meaning and my life has purpose because of these experiences. I have a deeper sense of my small role in this vast cosmos. Being part of this tribe, this people, Israel, has helped me to feel a sense of connection in a time of increasing alienation and division. And most importantly, it's through community that values are transmitted, values that point to a way of life that is based on justice and compassion and righteousness, a way of life that inspires us to make ourselves and the world a better place. This sense of connection to a people with a shared history, a shared destiny, and a common set of values provides us with what the great sociologist Peter Berger calls a plausibility structure, a system of meaning which helps us to make sense of our world and our place in it. But for so many people today, not just for Jews, the plausibility structure of community itself is being undermined in profound ways. Mark Dunkelman, a professor at Brown University, writes about this in his recent book, The Vanishing Neighbor: The Transformation of American Community. Dunkelman describes what he calls middle ring relationships. These involve people who are not family or close friends on the one hand, but they're not mere acquaintances on the other. Over the past few decades, these middle ring relationships have all but disappeared in America. And as a result, people feel less and less connected to their neighbors, their towns, and even more broadly, their country. An additional consequence of this alienation is a narrowing of our worldviews. Dunkelman notes that middle ring relationships are best suited to pierce our much bemoaned filter bubbles, the increasingly precise way we get our news and are exposed to ideas of others through the various feeds and tightly controlled and ever monetized by these algorithms that limit the ideas and the people and ultimately the experiences to which we are exposed. Before the deterioration of these middle ring relationships, Dunkelman notes that a left-wing academic might talk with a conservative banker while at line at Blockbuster Video. Remember old Blockbuster Video? That's how we used to rent movies, but not anymore. An activist might explain the benefits of paid leave to a skeptical businesswoman on the sidelines of a PTA meeting if that's how anybody spent their Tuesday nights anymore. Experiments, Dunkelman notes, that compel ordinary people to discuss a fraught topic face-to-face have illustrated that those conversations quite frequently lead participants to think differently. But without middle ring relationships, those sort of thoughtful and substantive interactions have become all too rare. And sadly, tragically even, our ability to connect deeply with what was once not a middle ring relationship, but rather a familial kin relationship, namely our relationship to Jewish community, has also been compromised. Locally and nationally and internationally, our Jewish community has become more fragmented and deeply divided politically, ethnically, and religiously, right versus left, Sephardi versus Ashkenazi, Orthodox versus Reform. And more globally, there has been a most unfortunate distancing between the two major centers of Jewish life today, Israel and the United States. This past summer, divisions between Israel and the diaspora surfaced in deeply troubling ways. The Kotel controversy and debate over a new conversion bill in the Knesset inspired headlines in Jewish newspapers, including this one that should send chills down our spines. Netanyahu to millions of Jews, we don't really want you. The author of that piece, David Horowitz, who's the editor of the Times of Israel, argued that the prime minister's decision to freeze the Western Wall compromise plan that had been labored over for more than 3 years was a blow to the heart and soul of world Jewry. And just a few weeks ago, right in the middle of the month of Elul, the month that leads us to this time of turning, this time of repentance. The chief Sephardic rabbi of Jerusalem said publicly that Reform Jews are worse than Holocaust deniers. Now, perhaps you're thinking, Rabbi, don't be so naive. This is how it's always been. This is how Jews are with one another. Indeed, my own grandfather used to tell me stories about how the German Jews in Omaha, Nebraska would look down on the shtetl Jews, my family, who came more recently from Poland. And what about that old adage, 2 Jews, 3 opinions? This one is beautifully illustrated by the tired joke about the Jew who's on a desert island. He's been shipwrecked, and a crew of a passing ship sees his campfire and comes to his aid. And when the captain of the ship comes ashore, the Jew thanks him profusely and offers him a tour of his little island. He shows him the fire pit where he cooks his food. He shows him the hammock where he sleeps. And then he takes him to his little synagogue that he's built where he can offer his prayers that one day he might be rescued. And on the way back to the ship, the captain notices a second synagogue. And the captain says to the little Jew, I don't understand. One synagogue, yes, you built a synagogue so you could daven, but you built this second synagogue. I don't get it. You're the only Jew on this island. Why would you need 2 synagogues? And the Jew says, well, the first shul, that's where I go to daven. This shul, I would never set foot in this shul. It's funny, and it's awful. And it's a rather apt metaphor for life on this planet today, or at least where we might be heading. Each of us alone on our own little islands, like the 2 couples I saw the other night out to dinner, all 4 of them on their smartphones, not one person looking up at the other, no conversation whatsoever, all alone on our little islands. One Jew with 2 synagogues, or even worse, one Jew who actively chooses to absent himself from all the synagogues. Each one of us an island, experiencing the world, filtering our news and our friends and the values we embrace, all on our own. And here's why this conversation is so urgent, why it matters so much right now. Because communities transmit values. And communities give us a sense that whatever the challenge, we can confront it more successfully together. Think about the extraordinary images we've seen over the last few weeks of devastation due to hurricanes and earthquakes. And think about the images you saw of neighbors risking their lives to help neighbors, right alongside professionally trained first responders. Now, as ever, we need each other. And whatever our differences, the challenges we're facing confront us all. Climate change, North Korean nukes, stagnant wages, social disruptions, a worldwide refugee crisis. No one is immune. Gay, straight, transgender, whether we were born in this country, immigrated here with all the proper papers, or whether we came as an infant in the arms of a parent who was dreaming of a better life, we are all in this together. And only through a shared commitment to our best values will we be able to survive, to thrive, to hope for and realize a brighter tomorrow for ourselves and for our children and for our world. So the challenge is bigger, and the sense of urgency is more pronounced. But the good news is that the solution really hasn't changed at all. It's all about commitment, and it's a matter of choice. We have a decision to make. Are the privileges and benefits of communal membership for us as Jews in particular, but more generally for us as human beings, are those privileges and benefits worth the efforts required? And if we conclude that they are, then it's about commitment. And make no mistake, it's always been a matter of choice. In Talmudic times, there was a robust competition amongst the Jewish, Christian, and pagan communities for the hearts and minds of the masses. And the rabbis, 2,000 years ago, had to make a case for Jewish community. And so first they laid out the obligations that the community has for the people. In short, said the rabbis, the community had to provide for the physical, intellectual, and spiritual needs of everyone. No small task. Soup kitchens for the poor, funding and matchmakers to make sure that orphans could marry, assistance for widows, burial societies and cemeteries for life's end, schools for learning and shuls for praying, emissaries to represent the interests of the community to the Gentile authorities. The community would provide everything. But the relationship had to be reciprocal. The individual has obligations to the community as well. And here's how the Midrash puts it. The person who asks, why should I trouble myself for the community? What's in it for me to worry about their problems? Why should I care what they say? I'm fine all by myself. According to the Midrash, this person, machriv et ha'olam, this person destroys the world. Now you might think that's an example of rabbinic exaggeration. Destroying the world might be putting it a little bit too strongly. And yet, the one who thinks, I'll worry just about myself and my needs alone, doesn't this way of thinking ultimately lead not merely to the disintegration of one's local community, but ultimately to the disintegration of society, of civilization itself? And here's what makes affiliation in Jewish community in particular, and the energy we expend to strengthen it more than a provincial, self-centered act. Communal affiliation is generative. The act of connecting more deeply to our particular community leads us to a deeper sense of obligation and concern for the broader community. Our affiliation with and affection for members of our tribe does not have to make us tribal in a parochial, narrow, xenophobic sense. In fact, our tribal tradition wants our particular personal experience to be a doorway to a more expansive sense of connection and responsibility for others who, while not MOTs, are part of our broader human family. As the great theologian and scholar Rabbi Eugene Borowitz argues, our particular religious vision is also profoundly and inseparably universal. Our people's master narrative of our slave ancestors being redeemed at the shores of the Red Sea leads us to understand in a personal and profound way the universal value of liberation and dignity for all people. So in a time when our nation is so deeply divided and so much in need of healing, our commitment to Jewish community and the values it upholds can actually help us to be better Americans. For as Jews, we have always cared about more than just our own. As the great sage Hillel put it 2,000 years ago, "Ukshe'ani le'atzmi ma'ani." If I'm only for myself, what am I? For our rabbis, the case for community is existential. Without it, the whole world is destroyed. We depend upon community for our very survival, physical, but also spiritual as well, because communities transmit values. And friends, our spirits, our souls, need the core values of our tradition now more than ever. In the face of hatred and violence, neo-Nazis and Klansmen marching in our streets, our tradition reminds us, Lo tisna et achicha bilvavecha. Hatred is a sin. In the face of racism and homophobia, xenophobia, our tradition reminds us that God created humanity through a common ancestor for the sake of peace, mipnei shlom habriot, so that no man or woman could ever say, Abba gadol mi avicha, my father, my mother is better than yours, my blood is redder than yours. We're all children of the same loving God. We're all connected. In a time of alternative facts, our tradition teaches us that there is such a thing as truth, and that the integrity of the world depends on our ability to make that distinction. In a time in our country when Disagreements about our deeply held beliefs increasingly move from what should be vigorous, healthy debates to scenes of chaos and violence in our cities and on our college campuses. Our tradition reminds us that no matter how hard, our job is to seek peace and pursue it. I could go on all day, but I won't. But let me just share one more text from our tradition. In a time of fear and uncertainty and anxiety that literally keeps us up at night sometimes, our tradition teaches us that the whole world is a very narrow bridge. But the important thing is not to be afraid. In the face of the very real and frightening challenges of our lives, our tradition reminds us never to lose hope, never to give in to our fears, and to remember that being part of a community is what can help us cross that narrow bridge. In my own experience, the gifts that I have received from being part of this community, this people, Israel, far outweigh what has been required of me. I get so much more than I give. And I know this is true for so many of you here today because you've told me so. You've told me story after story about how, perhaps in our parenting center right here on this campus, you made the very best friends in your life who have been there with you through all of the simchas and all of the troubling times as well. And you've told me about how right here, maybe in a Torah study class or at a Shabbat service, you found meaning and strength through life's challenging times. And you've told me about how our clergy, some of them for decades, have been there for your family, for B'nai Mitzvah and for weddings and for funerals too. And you've shared how you've found a deeper sense of purpose by volunteering in one of our Tikkun Olam projects. You've told me again and again that you have received even more than you've given. We're all lucky. We're so lucky to be part of a vibrant, established Jewish community. My mom and her family had to drive to Wichita, the big city, from El Dorado in order to attend Shabbat services. Now, truth be told, it was only 40 miles, which took them less time than it does for some of you to get here from Santa Monica on a Friday afternoon, I know, but it still took real effort. My mom could hardly imagine, as a young woman, a Jewish community like the one we get to enjoy here in Los Angeles, numbering hundreds of thousands, boasting synagogues and day schools and Jewish institutions of all shapes and sizes. My mom could not have imagined a shul with a pool, people. You take it for granted. She grew up in a town that didn't have any Jewish institutions and barely enough Jews to make a minyan. It's probably why she was always searching, always on the lookout for other MOTs, for other members of the tribe. It's what inspired her, I think, to give so much time and so much of her energy to her community. But I know that for her as well, ultimately, she received more than she gave. And when my mom died, much too young, hundreds and hundreds of members of our community were there to honor her and to remember her and to support us and to carry us in our grief. This is the commitment. This is the kind of support and the sense of belonging and meaning and purpose that we need and that we deserve. And it's what our nation and our world needs right now, too. But to get there, we're going to need to step up. And that's hard. I know we are stretched in 1,000 directions, but it's important. So in this new year of 5778, let's commit to doing more for each other. I'm not going to ask you to devote yourself 24/6 to your synagogue, although you'd be welcome to do so if you wish. But what if we each could commit to doing one additional act of kindness every month for this community? It might be attending a Shiva minyan or showing up to pack lunches for homeless folks in our city. Maybe it's reaching out and bringing a friend to a class or a service. Maybe it's helping to raise funds for a special project that will bring meaning and hope into our world. Maybe it's volunteering to serve on a committee or to help with a program. Whatever it is, let's commit to doing more in this new year. More to strengthen our tribe, our community, our people. And in so doing, we will strengthen our city and our nation and our world. Friends, we need each other desperately, joyfully, eternally. Good Yontif.
Shabbat Shalom. Gemar Chatima Tova.
We'll see you in the afternoon. Shana Tova.